Welcome to Side of Science.
With Stacey and Clinton, because every story has a side of science. On today's episode, we are talking the OG food of the gods. Why doesn't a flake melt? And answering the question, what makes chocolate so scientifically special?
Clinton, I was recently asked by Ross the other day why chocolate flakes don't melt.
Do they not?
They don't. No, not really.
You're talking about the Cadbury flake bar that crumbles over your ice cream.
The 50-cent flake that comes with the 50-cent code, yeah.
Doesn't melt.
It's no longer 50 cents. Yeah, doesn't melt.
What is going on? What makes... Yeah.
Yeah, so I want to answer this for him because it is really interesting and there's a lot of science in chocolate. So the reason it doesn't melt is with normal chocolate, which is basically a mix of cocoa butter and fat, there are 6 different crystallized forms that it can take. And when you temper chocolate, which just means to heat it and then cool it carefully.
Which is a process that a lot of people, like I've been in the kitchen before and almost been in tears when I haven't tempered it and it just turns into this like glunky mess.
I've never tried this, but I have seen on MasterChef it is an art form.
It's heartbreaking.
And you know when you've done it because you've got a smooth, glossy chocolate perfection, right?
It looks like chocolate, not like some mildewy kind of mess.
Well, I guess if you think about a flake, it's not got that gloss, right? So it's not really tempered in the same way. So if we think about our normal tempered chocolate, it has this kind of melt in your mouth experience, and that's part of the way that it's cooled and tempered. But the crystal form of cocoa butter really impacts the quality and characteristics. So that's things like melting point, texture, and stability. And so if you don't get those right, your chocolate's going to behave in different ways. So you want to temper it to achieve that perfect crystal form, which is actually type 5 crystals. That's the goal. And it's that temperature that you aim for because it has a melt temp of about 34 degrees. So it melts... Slightly
higher than your body temp. No.
Slightly lower.
Yeah.
So it melts in your mouth and not in your hand. And that gives it that, melt in your mouth feel. And it also has that snap that we associate with chocolate too.
So that's when that would be the kind of standard chocolate bar that we're talking about here.
Yeah, that's
right?
That's what you want to make in the kitchen, right? If you're not making a flake. But the flake has been folded and cooled quickly during production. So the fat crystals are disordered and in multiple unstable forms. So when we talked about those crystallized forms and we want that nice form 5, these have different, anywhere from form 1 to 5. So they're mixed and unaligned. And this disorder means the cocoa butter crystals are not neatly arranged. So when heated, they don't flow together into a glossy liquid. Instead, the layers crumble and soften, but don't turn into a smooth melt. So it's interesting because the different forms with the crystal structures, so like form 1, for example, has a really low melting point and is unstable and melts very easily, like 17 degrees. And then form 6 has a melting point around 36 degrees Celsius. So it's very stable, but that can lead to grainy texture and white coating over time. So there is like a sweet spot, pun intended, for chocolate. But the flake has unique physical structure that, with the thin folded layers and the different crystal forms within that, make it so unique.
This is reminding me or taking me back to like year 7, 8 science of solids and lattices. Is that what we're referring to when you say like a crystal structure?
Yeah, exactly. So if you think about a crystal structure, well-organized lattice repeating over time, over patterns, nice clear pattern. And so when you snap chocolate, you get that break of the
structure.
Pattern. Yeah.
Right.
Whereas a flake is more amorphous, so it doesn't have a regular repeating pattern. It's more disordered and the atoms are arranged really randomly or chaotically. and so it changes its behaviour.
And when you say amorphous, it's kind of, again, making me think of those states of matter and something like glass, which is that kind of like, it's not I remember it has properties that are sometimes like a solid and properties that are sometimes like liquid.
Yeah.
And is that what the kind of flake is?
Yeah, exactly. So glass is exactly that, technically a liquid that behaves like a solid. And so the atoms are disordered, they're frozen in place without a regular pattern. And that's why glass doesn't have a specific melting point. It just softens gradually when heated rather than melting cleanly and forming a liquid. So the flake chocolate is made by that cooling and folding of the chocolate quickly during manufacturing, and it prevents it forming the crystal structure. And so the cocoa butter crystals are mixed and disordered, and so they behave like an amorphous solid, even though the cocoa butter can crystallize, but when you heat it, it's just going to crumble rather than move into nice liquid.
Which is making me think why we have it in our ice creams at the beach.
Yes, exactly. So my husband's Scottish, and he actually thought that flakes were made specifically for Australia because they wouldn't melt in our hot climate, in Summer Bay. Actually they were designed by watching like drips of chocolate, I believe, sort of fall onto one another and creating this flake. And then they noticed it didn't melt, and so they were sold in like Mr. Whippy seaside kind of resorts and chucked in your ice cream at the beach.
Because if I put a bar of chocolate in my ice cream, it's going to melt possibly faster than the ice cream.
Yeah.
Whereas the flake is going to resist the heat of the sun.
Exactly. It can stay in the van till the next summer. No worries. Yeah.
Okay, so this is a tricky concept to get our heads around. So just to clarify, what is happening when we apply heat to a flake?
Yeah, so to understand that, if we look at normal chocolate and we apply heat, then those tightly packed cocoa butter and ingredients that are in there, that structured arrangement, they'll gain energy from the heat, they'll vibrate fast, and they will start to break free from their fixed positions, and they will start to flow and move past each other, and so you'll get chocolate sauce, basically. But
Willy Wonka and the river of chocolate.
Flakes, they sort of do melt, but not in that same way, and that's because they're disordered and loosely packed in those unstable forms. So what happens there is that those particles will still gain energy, they'll vibrate, they'll move more, just like regular melting, but because the crystals are jumbled and there's air gaps with the way that it's layered, then those particles, it'll soften and kind of collapse on itself and partially melt, but it won't flow.
Okay, so this has got me wondering, when I've been in Asia before and been desperate enough to go into a store in like Thailand or Indonesia and buy like a chocolate bar, and then that disappointment of opening it up and it doesn't look like chocolate. It's kind of like white-ish. Is this the same scientific principle happening?
It's related, yeah. So like we were saying, if you temper it and you get that nice glossy finish, that means that the fat molecules are all nice and aligned in that crystallization pattern. But what you're talking about is known as a fat bloom, which is sexy, isn't it? So this happens when chocolate melts slightly.
It also happens when I eat too much.
So when it melts slightly and cools again, what happens is those fat crystals separate out and they rise to the surface. And that's what you're seeing is the white pattern. That's the fat on top. So it looks like a dusty white coating.
Yeah, so that is the fat separating out from the other solids because because it's not being tempered properly.
Well, it started, or it's melted and set again. And so, that tempering process hasn't happened. And so it's perfectly safe to eat. And I think even you can, or you could try, I don't know if it's worth your while, but you could try and temper it again and then see if it would go back.
Which I've done before when I have screwed up the melting of chocolate at home. Like I can't remember what the techniques are, but you can add like a little bit of cream and you can just reheat it and it does eventually kind of go back to its... Yeah, it does. You can basically re-temper it back to shape.
Yeah.
I don't know if you try that with your chocolate bar in Phuket. Like, it depends on how desperate you are.
If it's hot enough.
Right. As long as it's safe to eat,
Yeah,
we can go there.
Safe to eat. You can get a sugar bloom too. So when chocolate is exposed to moisture, then the water can dissolve sugar on the surface of chocolate. And so when it dries, you're kind of left with a white grainy layer. I haven't really come across that, but I'm certainly familiar with the fat bloom.
I'm already, Stacey, hearing a lot of or seeing a lot of signs in this, particularly for I'm thinking of junior secondary. Like, I'm going back to year 7 thinking of solid liquid gases. Like, obviously already hearing that.
Yeah, 7 and 8 science, certainly. So mixtures, so the difference between sort of pure substances and mixtures. Chocolate's a great example of a mixture. States of matter, so we've talked about melting, which then leads into physical and chemical changes as well. And properties like melting temperatures and looking at those. So you could do a number of experiments using chocolate and demonstrating that principle.
Lots of taste testing.
Yeah.
So we've talked quite a bit already about the physical and chemical properties that make chocolate special, and the flake in particular. What else what's inside chocolate that makes it so special? Like, for example, like why are we craving it so much? Why has it been such a core part of a lot of human civilization over like the last 5,000 years, really? Like, it's really sustained as a food.
Yeah. Well, it makes us feel good. And so that really comes down to, I guess, some of the chemicals that are in it. So the sugar and fat activate the brain's reward system. So that's pretty much what chocolate is. And so your brain releases dopamine, which is a feel-good neurotransmitter. And so you feel pleasure and satisfaction in eating some chocolate. It also contains tryptophan, which is an amino acid. So amino acids make up proteins. But tryptophan is used to make the protein serotonin. And serotonin is another mood regulator that makes us feel good. So by eating chocolate, you'll be essentially calmer and happier, which is always good. And then another interesting chemical is phenylethylamine, or PEA. And this chemical is associated with the feeling of being in love. So it's thought to enhance the effects of dopamine, and you get this chemical naturally through, as I said, being in love and exercise. And so it mimics that kind of natural high.
Which is super interesting, because I'd read a lot into the history of chocolate, and particularly the Maya and Aztec use of chocolate around, like, particularly medicinal purposes.
Right.
But also the fact that even as chocolate spread across into Europe through Spain, etc., it was seen as an aphrodisiac. And so hearing some of those descriptions of what you've just said, it makes sense. Like, these kind of basically increases your mood or improves your mood, makes you feel good, has this feeling almost kind of like of being in love. Like, it's triggering these kind of chemicals that are in many ways kind of medicinal. So it makes sense why it was so widely touted in that period as being helpful to humans.
Yeah, certainly. And the other, I guess that makes you more receptive, doesn't it? All those kinds of things. The other thing that's in it as well is theobromine and caffeine. So these are mild stimulants, and they also will kind of help produce energy. And theobromine is more mild than caffeine, so it has more gentle effects, but it does give you a subtle buzz, so lifting your mood and without the jitters.
Theobromine, if I'm not mistaken, is the chemical, though, that makes chocolate so dangerous to dogs.
Yeah. So theobromine is named after the chocolate plant, so it doesn't actually have anything to do with bromine element itself, but it is certainly toxic to dogs, and more so in states like baking chocolate and dark chocolate. Milk chocolate isn't actual chocolate; it doesn't really contain chocolate, so we'll forget about that. But if a dog gets hold of that, then it can have dramatic effects.
And the theobromine, I think, as you just said, is in high concentrations in dark chocolate.
Yeah, and baking chocolate. So if a dog gets hold of that over Easter, you want to take it to a vet really quickly, because in humans, there are enzymes in our liver that will break this down relatively quickly. But for a dog, they don't have as much of this enzyme that's necessary, and so they can't break it down as quickly. And so it starts to accumulate in their system much longer than ours. And so the effects of that are nervous system overstimulation. So restlessness, tremors, seizures, they're constantly being activated. That can mean they've got increase in heart rate, irregular heart rhythms, lots of kidney issues as well. So they might actually try to eliminate it through lots of urination, which can then lead to dehydration as well. So, yeah, it will be bad news for dogs.
So that's interesting because it's not then that dogs are necessarily allergic to chocolate per se, or that there's anything that is like specific that dogs are reacting to in chocolate that humans don't. It's just that they're metabolizing the theobromine at a slower rate, meaning that it accumulates in their body.
Exactly.
Whereas we're digesting it and metabolizing it out of our body and turning it into other chemicals, whereas a dog, it accumulates and then it has these effects.
Yeah, and this was interesting to me because enzymes' structure and function is really specific. So it was like, well, why do they even have this enzyme? We have it because we have a varied diet, and so we need this enzyme to be able to break down these particular types of chemicals. Dogs have it too because it does help with certain chemicals, but they're not adapted to eating the same diet that we are. They're not really going to come across chocolate, or they shouldn't. And so they haven't needed to have more of this enzyme. And so from an evolutionary perspective, it's far less abundant in dogs, and then therefore this chemical can build up and cause drastic effects.
Interestingly as well, I had read that it's similar for cats. But cats are just less likely to consume chocolate left around at Easter because they actually don't have sweet senses in their tongue.
Yeah. So they are more sensitive to it, but they are more picky. And so they won't go, shouldn't be really highly unlikely for a cat
Do
to
not
see a
test
cat.
it. Let's not test it at home, but unlikely the cat's going to find the brownies in the corner and
go for it.
Go for it like a dog would.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a really good example, or I guess case study, where you could bring in enzymes to senior biology because it shows how different concentrations of enzymes will lead to different concentrations of products because of the breaking down of the substrate. So that could be a good one.
And while we're talking theobromine, I think from memory that's also the name of it's the Theobroma plant, and then that's the theobromine is the chemical.
Yeah, so theobromine chemical was named after the plant, but it was interesting to look at where this name comes from. So if we break down theobroma, theo means gods and broma is food, so it translates literally to food of the gods. So someone knew what they were talking about, and that person was Carl Linnaeus. So Carl Linnaeus was a Swedish botanist in the 1700s. So you might have heard his name in Year 7 classification because he's the guy we talk about as being the father of classification. He came up with the structure or the nomenclature of which we give scientific names today. So every living organism is classified according to their kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species.
That just rolls off the tongue.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so Carl actually named the cocoa plant Theobroma cacao. So he actually gave it that name. And he was well known for sort of some fun names. So he also named humans the scientific name Homo sapien, which means wise man. So he knew what he was talking about.
So there's a really good connection again there from chocolate right into a really core part of science.
Yeah, Year 7 classification, all the way through your senior sciences as well if you're looking at ecology and scientific naming. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about what makes chocolate, the bar, the final product that we consume, so special from a chemical and a kind of the different states it can exist in. What is it, though, about the tree that makes it so special, that gives us this incredible product?
Well, it only grows in certain areas, so it's native to Central and South America and kind of rainforest environment. And the flowers grow on the trunk, which is quite unique as well. So this is called cauliflory. So that's from the Latin caulis, which means stem, and floris for flowering. So that's pretty unique. Like if you think about bananas, they obviously grow from the branches. Most fruits do, but here they just come straight out of the trunk. And I suppose that's more for ease of pollination as well. So what's interesting about them is that they're pollinated by midges and not bees. And so cacao flowers can only be pollinated by these little midges. And if there weren't any midges, we wouldn't have chocolate.
Thank goodness for the midges.
Yeah.
Now, I was lucky enough to go to Costa Rica last year. I stayed a couple of days on a cacao farm. And it was crazy because I never realised, I'd never seen the cocoa pod like firsthand, like growing on a tree, and they're big. Like
Really? How big?
Like how big? Like we're talking like something between an avocado and a football. Like shrink a football slightly. It's a hefty, heavy pod. So I'm imagining maybe, I don't know, like maybe it's able to grow to that kind of size because it is a bit lower and it's not kind of dangling off a branch, because they're like big, heavy pods. I kind of expected something much smaller. So
Yeah, that's interesting.
I was also really surprised to see the variety of colours that they come in. Like I certainly saw like green, which I think were kind of the less ripe ones. But even the more mature ones came in like purples and oranges and quite vibrant colours, which I understand is related to potentially the genetics as well as the ripeness of the pod. But like they come in a great variety as well. So super interesting plant.
Yeah, definitely. I guess that kind of leads into the different flavours as well. Like you're going to get certain unique flavours from certainly the soil that the plant is growing in, the genetics of the pod, as well as the ripeness of the pod. And then I think with the midge as well, they can potentially influence flavour complexity. So you've got so many different variables, which I guess is why we have so many different types of chocolate and everyone has a favourite. There's so many different ways to put it all together.
And that's not even, I guess, then accounting for the process that follows once the pod is off the tree and it's split open and it's fermented and it's roasted. Like there are so many factors going in because these beans are essentially fermented in the open air, taking in the kind of microbes from the environment. So they're obviously going to be very different in Costa Rica to, say, Ghana in Africa. So you've got all these environmental factors coming into it, which I guess ultimately, as you said, influence of flavour, which is why high-end chocolate is often advertised as being Ecuadorian versus from Ghana.
Right, okay, so if you leave it sort of fermenting between 5 and 7 days, you're going to break down the sugars in that and that's going to develop chocolate and flavour, so then you're going to get less bitterness, but you could tailor that to different types of chocolate.
And I certainly understand from when I was on the farm that them telling us, like, if they kind of get it wrong, it can go wrong in that, like, it can grow funguses really quickly if the fermentation's not done properly or it's not dried out. It can also go really bitter if they don't do certain stages for long enough. So there is quite a lot of science.
Don't waste the chocolate.
No,
don't get it wrong.
That would be heartbreaking to throw away.
I have heard that they're actually using CRISPR techniques, so gene editing techniques, within the chocolate plant to make it more resistant to things like fungus and pests, and more tolerant to floods as well, so that we can hopefully preserve the chocolate plant for good.
Well, this is a plant, I guess, and a species that is quite prone and susceptible to the weather, particularly in climate change over time as well, because it grows in a really quite narrow band close to the equator and is really quite susceptible as a plant to, like, too much sunlight, too much rain. Like, it's not something that's a super hardy plant, as I understand from my reading of it. So
yeah, it's not a weed that's going to grow anywhere.
No, we can't afford to lose chocolate.
Exactly.
For the good of mankind.
So a single pod typically contains about 20 to 50 beans, and these beans are embedded in like a sweet, tangy pulp that is what gets fermented and dried before becoming chocolate.
Which I tried. And it's not nice.
Is it not?
No. I thought it would be like a fruity, kind of like chocolatey taste. No, it's just kind of like, filler.
Oh, so what do they do? Does that sort of get discarded?
I think because it gets dried out, it basically just becomes like just kind of like the byproduct.
Right.
Essentially.
Okay.
And because there's so much water content in there, that ends up basically mostly just reducing down.
Right. Oh, interesting. So to take it back to our flake bar, about 1 to 3 pods worth of beans, depending on the pod size, but typically into a flake bar.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
Like I said, like it's a small football, so it's 1.5 footballs of beans for a flake.
and you think about these trees only growing in a certain region and needing certain requirements, and now it kind of makes sense why it's typically expensive.
When you get the really good stuff, right? And like you said earlier, why so much of like the milk chocolate, really, when you look at the ingredients, is mostly just emulsifiers and fillers.
Yeah.
Because to sell a block for $4.50, when it is such a kind of rare commodity, it makes complete sense.
Such a process, yeah.
Right. We talked a bit about the process of turning it from essentially the tree into a bean into a bar. There's a critical stage, the roasting of the beans. As I understand, it has a really kind of important scientific process happening, which is the Maillard effect.
Yeah. So the Maillard reaction is a chemical reaction between amino acids and reducing sugars that gives brown food the distinctive flavour. So if you think of toast, so bread becomes toast because of the Maillard reaction, and you see that browning. The crust on your steak, that's the same thing. So it's these amino acids and sugars like glucose that actually form that. So it's not caramelization, it is different, but it just requires amino acids, the sugars, and the heat in order to get that flavour. And we see that in chocolate as that chocolate aroma and dark colour of those beans.
And I think it's where a lot of that flavour development happens that we associate with chocolate.
Yeah, I guess too. If you think about your toast, the further you take it, you're going to change those flavours until you've got charcoal.
And literally, and it starts to become often like more bitter.
Exactly.
Because it's got that kind of like burnt taste.
Yeah.
So we've talked about chocolate quite a bit and we're both craving chocolate.
Yes.
What is it about the science of chocolate that makes it so special?
Well, I think it is high energy, low volume food. So it's packed with fats and sugars. It is a mood booster. So it's got those dopamine triggering compounds and tryptophan for serotonin and the feeling and love chemical. It's also really low in water, so it's not prone to spoilage. So you can, if you can, keep it on your shelf for a long time. It doesn't stay long on my shelf. But actually, for all those reasons, it's used in space food a lot.
The astronauts are eating chocolate.
They are.
I wonder if they get to pick which brand they get. Like they're like, I want Lindt, I don't want Cadbury. Surely.
As
I
a
hope so.
minimum, right? Yeah, like I hope so. I do know that there was one particular astronaut who took chocolate hazelnut spread specifically to the ISS.
Fair.
Yeah.
I am on board with that. Okay, so tying it back to the curriculum, we've talked a little bit throughout the episode of where it fits in. Quick recap.
Earth and space as your number one, right? And then for chemistry, we've got things like mixtures, physical and chemical change and states of matter and your chemical properties. And then for bio, we looked at enzymes. We briefly mentioned CRISPR. Then there's classification, plant ecology, ecosystems, pollination, all tied into there as well. So you could do a whole unit on chocolate.
A lot to explore from a bar, and students would love it.
Absolutely.